Welcome to Secure Freedom Radio. This is Frank Gaffney, your host and guide for what I think of as an intelligence briefing on the war for the free world. When we're talking about intelligence, I often turn to a man who has it in abundance. He also happened to have served with great distinction as the Director of Central Intelligence under President Bill Clinton. Today he is the chairman of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and an enormously influential and important and articulate contributor to the national security debate. He is the Honorable R. James Woolsey, a lawyer by training, but we don't hold that against him. He is a man who has served, as I say, his country in many different capacities, including as an ambassador and as an undersecretary of the United States Navy, and it is always a delight to have him with us. Mr. Ambassador, welcome back to Secure Freedom Radio.
Hey, Frank, good to be with you.
You have been doing some writing on a subject near and dear to our hearts, Jim, often with a colleague by the name of Dr. Peter Pry, who we featured on our program last week. You have expressed really very strong opposition to this deal the president has conjured up with Iran. Give us in a short form why you are so concerned about it and why it should not be approved.
Well, there's a host of reasons, one of which is it's going to pump $100 billion plus or minus a few tens of billions into the pockets of the Revolutionary Guard in Iran to foster terrorism as we move away from the sanctions. It's not an agreement that is going to end Iran's move toward having a nuclear weapon. If anything, it will accelerate it, and it makes it virtually certain after the sundown provisions or sunset provisions in 10 to 15 years. So there's a lot wrong with it, but in many ways, one of the worst, if not the worst thing that's wrong with it, is that by ensuring that Iran, either by cheating, which they virtually certainly will do, or by working on their now legitimized nuclear infrastructure for 10 years or so, they will have a nuclear weapon, or at the very least, they will be within a month or so of having one. That situation means that they would be able, with a single nuclear weapon and with the capacity to put a weapon into orbit, or to fire it against the United States from a so-called Scud in the tub. That is a Scud, simple Scud missile, of which 45 countries have some, in a freighter or perhaps steamer, to detonate a nuclear weapon up above the center of the United States with electromagnetic pulse generated by such a weapon that takes out essentially our electrical infrastructure, the transformers, particularly in our electrical transmission system. And the punchline here is that we have 18 critical infrastructures in the United States: food, water, banking, etc. All 17 of the others depend on the electrical infrastructure. So if the electricity grid goes, not just for an hour or two blackout, but for weeks to months to years, we are not back in the 1980s pre-web. We are back in the 1880s pre-electric grid, and very few of us have enough plow horses or seeds to live in the 19th century.
Yeah, no, it's a frightening prospect. It truly could bring about what the Iranians have claimed is their purpose, of death to America or a world without America. And I appreciate so much, Jim, your efforts and Peter Pry's to help underscore why this Iran deal is potentially an existential threat. You've made the more general point in a recent piece with Peter at National Review that there is an arms control delusion at work here. And I was very gratified to see you refer to a study that was epic, I believe, in its time, but has not really seen the light of day. Talk a bit, if you would, Jim, about the report of the General Advisory Committee on Arms Control and Disarmament provided for President Reagan back in his day.
Yes, well, that needs to become public, and there's no reason why a journalist with enough money and time to sit and wait out the declassification process couldn't have a very, very thorough analysis, at least as of the time that was written, on some of the weaknesses of arms control. I'm not universally opposed to arms control. I've been an advisor once and a presidentially appointed delegate twice, and been the chief of mission and run my own negotiation, the Conventional Forces in Europe negotiation. So I've been deeply involved in arms control negotiations 4 times with the Soviets or the Warsaw Pact. And sometimes there are some useful things one can do with them. One has to get the timing right. I was very lucky to be put in charge of the Conventional Force in Europe negotiations 4 days after the Berlin Wall went down. So though I would love to say that we got a really very good treaty, which Putin has now renounced and canceled for Russia, we got a very good treaty out of those negotiations through my negotiating skills. I'm afraid I can't really claim that. What is reality is that the timing was perfect. The Soviets were struck dumb by the fact that the Berlin Wall had just gone down, and we dealt with them in a reasonable way and got some very good limitations on not just the number, but the location, even inside Russia, of their conventional forces.
Speaking of Russia, Jim, if I may, one other piece of this Iran deal that is very troubling is that perhaps 5 years from now, perhaps much more quickly, the Russians will be able to sell, among other countries for that matter, to the Iranians advanced conventional weapons. In fact, we're hearing reports of not only S-300 surface-to-air missiles, but also a fleet of advanced Russian fighter aircraft may be on their way to Iran in the not-too-distant future. Can you tell us, as a man who spent a lot of time monitoring conventional forces, of course, in connection with this arms control effort, but more broadly, and also from the position of a former director of Central Intelligence, how serious a problem this represents, quite apart from the nuclear threat you've described, for America, its interests and allies in the region, perhaps beyond?
Well, the one way that everyone talks about is the possibility for either Israel or the United States to deal with a recalcitrant or cheating Iran and to make sure that they don't successfully develop a nuclear weapon would be a military strike of the sort that Israel has used on several occasions against Syria and the like. Against their nuclear infrastructure. Well, they've used it. Israel has used it in the past against Iraq, but there is also we've had half a dozen times in which, one way or another, a country in that part of the world has seen its embryonic nuclear capability taken out by a military strike with conventional aircraft. That would be open to us and or Israel as long as we can get the aircraft through defenses, and as long as the weapon that we used was one that would penetrate deep into mountains and rocks, because that would be necessary. The Iranians are building have built in the past, and I rather imagine will continue to build their nuclear facilities very deep underground. But with some of these new air defense missiles that may get sold by Russia to Iran, it may be a great deal harder for either the Israelis or for us to penetrate Iran's defenses and take out those facilities that are being built to design and develop and produce nuclear weapons.
In other words, likely to not only enhance their resilience, but also intensify their ambitions and their aggressiveness, a frightening prospect on top of everything else. Jim Woolsey, thank you again for what you're doing, often with Peter Pry, but in many other regards, notably at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, for helping us all understand this threat that is present and growing, and likely to do much more of the latter under the Obama administration, what I call Obama bomb deal. Keep up the good work, my friend. Come back to us again if you would. Next up, Nick Hanlon of the Center for Security Policy on Africa and the Iran deal. Straight ahead.